Are you? I'm there. Can you see me? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trauma in Action Zoom. We started and Zoom crashed, so we're going to wait a few minutes before we get started, just to allow people to join us. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm really heartened by the number of people who signed up to join this webinar. Initially, it was going to be a group of 50 people, and then I decided to open it to everyone. And we have 470 registered, which is probably why Zoom crashed right at the beginning. And so I'm grateful that you are here. My name is Mace Imad, and I will be facilitating today's session. So I want to just let you know a few things. Number one, I'm not a psychologist. And so anything I give is based on my background as a neuroscientist, but more importantly, as a teacher and as a student who has experience and is experiencing trauma right now. Number two, all the slides will be available as well as the recordings. And number three, I was going to say that we may experience internet disconnection. And so stay tuned. I will reboot, I will come back. And then the fourth thing is you have the opportunity to place your questions or comments in the chat. And with me here today is my housemate and my colleague who will be sifting through the questions, and I will go through them. And whatever I don't answer, I will answer into a separate document and share it with you. And so with that, welcome, and let's get started. I'm going to now share my screen with you so you could look at my PowerPoint presentation, and which that one crashed also. So I'm going to just give me a second to open it. Right. So I am, again, for those of you who are just joining us, I am opening my PowerPoint to share with you because the system crashed right at the beginning. And this is what I'm waiting for right now. All right, perfect. So I have the PowerPoint and I'm going to share it with you right now. So if you can't hear me, put something into the chat and my colleague will let me know. Like I said, this is being recorded. So my name is Mace Imad. I am a faculty member at Pima Community College in Tucson, Arizona. And I am the coordinator for the Teaching and Learning Center. This is my email where you could reach me. And I want to begin by sharing with you a part of a research that I did with students at Pima Community College from several years ago, where I asked students to describe what the purpose of higher education for them is and what the students talked about. I want to share some of the feedback that students from different disciplines talked about. They talked about that they want to innovate and leave meaningful impact on my community, to develop skills that can be useful in helping my community and to give back, to stand on my own and help my community, to help myself become a better person so I can help others. And another one says to become a better human being. I want to start with this because I want to remind you who our students are and what their aspirations are and what our role is going to be and should be to navigate through these uncertain times. I also asked students in the same research to describe their professors. And overwhelmingly, this is a large sample size of over 800 students. They came back and they said remarkable and positive things about their professors. And I want to share some of them with you. A student wrote that they do make a huge difference in our education. I appreciate how much of an impact they make on our young adult lives. I really admire that they do what they do, and I love to learn. And so this reminds me of what one of my colleagues, Kevin Gannon, in his recent book, Radical Hope, where he talks about that the reason we do what we do because we believe it matters. So he says, teaching is a radical act of hope. It is an assertion of faith in a better future, in an increasingly uncertain and fraught present. It is a commitment to that future, even if we can't clearly discern its shape. This quote really touches me, especially now, and brings to mind my own trauma as a student and the role my teachers played during that trauma. So some of you know that I was a middle school student during the 1991 Iraq War. And we were taken out of the school abruptly, and we had we had bombing for 40 days and 40 nights, and then we went back to school. And when we went back to school, there were students in my class that were not there, which we learned that they died as a result of the bombing. What I do remember is one of my teachers, who was my composition teacher, who used to be the most stoic. She was very rigid and all about the grades, revealed herself to us. And what I mean by that, she really cloaked us with compassion and kindness to heal us. And she would talk about herself and about her son and about her husband. And there was so much anxiety that I experienced at that time. And one of them had to do with, how are we going to cover all the material? We lost 40 days. And she would say, it's okay, we will get through it. And this, it's okay, we will get through it, really helped me work through my own trauma at that time. So I want us to reflect on what our role is right now and what can we do to navigate through not just the COVID-19 situation, but the reality that our students come to us, the millennials, already facing a lot of anxiety and depression and mental illness. So here is, this is an example of what I'm talking about, where the Active Minds, which is a nonprofit organization that tries to highlight and destigmatize mental illness, showed in 2017 that 1 in every 4 college students has some kind of mental illness. And that, combined with a recent poll by YouGov, which shows that 3 in every 10 millennials experience either always or often a sense of loneliness. So that, plus the fact that we are in socially isolated, we have been removed from the classroom and from the campuses, I think we are facing, I would say, an even bigger trauma than what I faced when I was a middle school student that underwent a war. And the reason I say it's an even bigger trauma, because at that time when I was a student, we had social mixing. We could go to our friends and hug them. The teacher could hug us. We could hug our family members. And right now we're told to distance more and more. And so we are facing a really challenging time, and we are up to that challenge. And this is what this session is about. And so the question is, how do we teach to the lonely, to the fearful, and even to the broken? And with that, I want to talk about what today's learning objectives are. My goal for you is for you to develop an understanding of what trauma is and the psychological impact of traumatic experiences. I hope for you to understand the impact of traumatic experiences on the brain and on learning. And finally, I want to share with you some strategies that can mitigate the impact of trauma and help improve learning. And so with that, I'm going to begin by talking about what trauma is and its psychological impact. So the American Psychological Association defines trauma as an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. There is another definition that I would like us to consider, and that definition comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And in the definition, I will highlight why I want to use this definition. They say that trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening. And that has a lasting adverse effect on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. What I'd like you to pay attention to in here is the fact that this definition highlights the word experience. And so, and the reason I say I want you to pay attention to this, because how we experience and our perception of the trauma really determines how our body is going to deal with it. What I'm talking about here is that the key to defining trauma is that we all share an instinct to survive. And so our instinct to survive is going to define the reaction to trauma. What I'm talking about here is all of us, this is common to all animals, is that our brain is mostly concerned, or rather it's only concerned with minimizing danger and maximizing reward. And so if my brain is going to sense that there is danger, then it's going to disengage. If it's going to sense that something is not dangerous, it's going to offer me reward and pleasure, it will engage. And the key here to pay attention to is that regardless of our conscious awareness, right? What that means is if I sense subconsciously that something is threatening, then I am going to, physiologically, I'm going to respond to this. I will give you an example. Last year, I was waiting at the car shop for my car to get serviced. And while I was waiting at the car shop, I was using my computer to answer students' email. And I noticed that I was sweating, my heart rate was up, I was very irritable, I was slamming on the keyboard, and I didn't know what was going on, but I sensed that something was off in my physiology. And I sensed that I was scared. So what I did is I closed my computer and I just closed my eyes and I listened. What was going on? I wanted to listen to what was going on. what was going on is on the TV, there were gunshots, and it was the news that was replaying over and over what happened. There was a baseball game that the senators were playing, and there was a shooting, and somebody had recorded it. So even though I was aware that there were no gunshots at the car shop, my body subconsciously associated gunshots with danger, and it went into the fight or flight. Now, there is another traumatologist and a neurologist, Robert Scare, who talks about trauma as being any negative event that places us in a position of helplessness. And so with that, I would argue that the event of the COVID-19 has placed us in a position where we're all experiencing trauma. And the question then for me is, how does trauma engage our natural instinct? And more importantly, what does our body do in order to survive? And so this is where I want to share with you just very briefly, how do we deal with trauma? But before that, I just want you to take a minute and perhaps close your eyes and think about the question of are you experiencing trauma as a result of school closure, job loss, COVID-19, the news, etc. When we experience trauma, again, whether we are conscious or subconscious of it, what happens is that our body is going to have a variety of responses. We could experience hopelessness, nightmares, panic attack. We feel emotionally overwhelmed. Some people will turn into drinking and substance abuse. We're very irritable. We're depressed. We can't do anything. We don't have any interest. And those are those reactions are divided into categories. We could have a physical reaction, an emotional, a cognitive, and a behavioral one. I want to focus today on how these reactions can hijack our ability to learn, can hijack our students' ability to learn. And so if you're experiencing any of these, then good news is you are experiencing, your response is normal or typical. It's a typical reaction to an abnormal event. So I want to focus now specifically on the brain and learning. When the brain experiences chronic stress or a traumatic experience, what happens? So this is not going to be a lesson in neuroscience, but I'm just quickly going to go over trauma, the brain, and student learning. I want you to keep in mind 3 structures, and those 3 structures are part of our emotional brain, the limbic system: the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. Our prefrontal cortex is the region of the brain that helps us make good decisions. That's the part of the brain that tells us we don't need to buy all the toilet paper in the store. Our amygdala, on the other hand, deals with fear, and it becomes, that's the panic. That's the part of the brain that's telling us that our butts are going to be abandoned, and so we need to buy all the toilet papers in the store. And then the hippocampus is the part of the brain that deals with learning, with consolidation, with memory. And so here is another cartoon that demonstrates to you what I am talking about. So again, so the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain that is helping us make good decisions. So we need this. We need it for working memory. We need it for learning. We need it for understanding. The amygdala deals with help us stay safe and recognize danger and anger and emotions. And then the hippocampus help us remember and learn. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you what happens when we experience an abnormal level of stress, an above normal level of stress. And I am arguing that what we're experiencing right now, whether it's moving our classes online, whether it is not being on campus, along with our students' new reality, is an abnormal, traumatic level of stress. So when we experience high level of stress, the brain is going to send a signal to our adrenal glands to release cortisol, which is a stress hormone. That cortisol is going to mess with a lot of things. One of them is our circadian rhythm, and it's going to cause sleep disturbances. And so if you're having a hard time falling asleep or waking up in the middle of the night or not getting enough sleep, that is normal. You're experiencing trauma. In addition, when that circadian rhythm is going to be messed up, it's going to also mess up or disrupt a cellular mechanism that is inflammation. And inflammation is part of our immune system. We want inflammation, but too much inflammation can really alter and destruct our body. It can lead to diseases. So when that happens, it's going to actually, too much of that inflammation, it leads to brain cell destruction. Which brain cells? Well, a lot of brain cells, but the ones that we're interested in is the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. It's more or less. So it causes the memory issues, it could lead to neurological disorder and brain fog. So the chronic stress is going to cause hippocampus, that's the area of the brain that deal with memory, atrophy. What that word means is that the cells in the hippocampus, if there is chronic stress and there is too much cortisol, they will die, right? So think about, we're asking our students to do what? We're asking them to learn and memorize and all of these things. And in the meantime, their brain is being hijacked by cortisol. The amygdala, on the other hand, is going to initially hypertrophy. It's going to be really hyperactive. And then the prefrontal cortex is also going to atrophy. What we know that there is structural changes that will happen when we have chronic stress. And those structural changes are going to cause decrease in attention, decrease in perception, decrease in short-term memory, and decrease our ability to make decisions. So think about it. Think about what I said at the beginning. Our brain cares to survive. Right now, we just want to survive. And it sees a lot of things as fight or flight. And what the body is going to do, who cares about learning? I care about survival, right? And so I'm going to talk about mitigating strategies to help us learn that it's actually not fight or it's not life-threatening what we are experiencing. So the take-home message is that trauma impairs our ability to make decisions, to remember, and to even learn. And the way this is going to manifest in student is in a variety of ways. I'm going to share with you some of them. That students may have a hard time keeping track of changes in our classes. So what I'm talking about here is I emailed the students to check up on them, to talk about the new syllabus and how, and I asked them to fill out a form. I wanted to get their feedback. And overwhelmingly, my students said, please don't make too many changes, right? Because they're overwhelmed, as many of us are. They're gonna have a hard time making a decision to learn. So what I mean about that, anytime I get new information and I process that information, I am making a decision that I'm going to learn it. And some of these things are subconscious. And so when a student says, I can't learn math, I can't do this, it is their subconscious brain that is dictating that this is overwhelming. And so they preemptively say, I can't do it. Another one is they're going to have a hard time prioritizing assignments, right? And so if we give them so many assignments, one of my students said, because I said I'm suspending the exams. And one of the students said, please don't make us do a lot more work in place of the exam. And if you do, tell us what to start with. So they really, we may look at it and say, oh, they just want us to spoon feed them. They're overwhelmed. So they have a hard time prioritizing. Another way it could manifest itself is that they may just have a really hard time engaging with the classmates or even the subject that we are teaching. And think about your own reaction to what's going on. Some of you are withdrawing. Some of you are having a hard time staying at home. And so we have different reactions, but one of them is going to be how we engage with others. And another one is managing their time. They will have a hard time managing their time. And so the question is, and also actually importantly, they may have a hard time not quitting. So what I mean by this is, and I study stress, I measure students' stress, we look at interventions. What I mean by this is, few years ago, I noticed that after the first exam in one of my courses, physiology, students, I give them the exam, they go home, and by the time I go home, I see that some of them dropped. And I think, wait a second, why did they drop? I contact them and I said, I noticed that you dropped the class. And they say, oh yeah, that was really difficult. I don't think I'm gonna make it. Well, most of the students who drop, actually, they end up with an A or a B on the exam. And so when they are under so much stress, their ability to make decisions, their ability to stand in the discomfort becomes really, really difficult. And so it's important to keep that in mind. A lot of the students are going to freeze. So in one of the experiments that I did, actually, it was inspired by students who said that I see sometimes when I give them exam, they leave the page blank, and I say, why do you leave it blank? Write anything. Give me a chance to give you partial credit. So we did this experiment where we simulated exams on the computer, and we did eye tracking. And what our preliminary data shows is that when a student encounters stress and pressure, they literally freeze. They freeze. Their focus becomes on in the middle of the screen as opposed to looking at different regions. And so we know it's real. And the question is then, how do we mitigate that? Well, the question actually for me is knowing what I know about the brain, and knowing that what Antonio Damasio, who is a neurologist, says, that we are not thinking machines that feel. Rather, we are feeling machines capable of thinking. And so knowing what I know about the trauma, about the neuroscience, about students, what they're experiencing, I began to ask myself, how can I teach? And how can I help students learn and engage? And for me, it is teaching through the lens of a trauma-informed practices that is going to be most appropriate, and I would argue most ethical. So with that, I want to share with you some of those practices. So we looked at very briefly at the traumatic experience, and how our body experiences it, and our brain, and how it hijacks our ability to learn. And what I want to do in the next half an hour or so, actually less than that, I want to go over strategies. And so strategies to mitigate this impact and improve learning. Well, I want to start by sharing with you what one of my teachers have taught me. Few years ago, I said that I wanted to do meditation with the student, and my teacher said, well, you can't teach what you don't have. If you don't have a solid practice, don't think about teaching it. Or I am going to bring this here right now and say, how are you dealing with your own trauma, right? How are you dealing with your own stress? And I want to bring to mind Toni Morrison, who writes about a friend. And she says that She is a friend of mine. She gathered me. The pieces I am, she gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order. It's good, you know, when you got a woman who is a friend of your mind. My teacher, when I was in middle school, gathered us and maintained our sanity. And my question to you is right now, before you begin thinking about gathering your student and helping them, the question is, who or what is your support system? And this is really critical. Your well-being is critical because the situation is fluid. We don't know if it's going to be weeks or months. And so it's really important that we maintain emotional well-being, mental well-being, and figure out what works for you. And so I, for example, have been experiencing insomnia, where I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with severe anxiety. And initially I was embarrassed. I didn't know why I was having that, because I'm supposed to be like strong and so on. And then I recognized that, oh, this is physiology. And so I am going to do what helps me get my mind off of it and go back to bed. And so one strategy for me that works so beautifully, and I am not ashamed to share it, is that I watch an episode of The Kardashian, and then boom, I'm able to go back to sleep. So whatever works for you that helps you stay sane, stay healthy, whether reaching out to your colleague, check up on your colleagues, is really, really critical. So now that I shared with you my guilty pleasure, I'm going to talk about strategies that we could use to teach through the lens of trauma-informed pedagogy. And this really comes from, trauma-informed care. So the discipline really highlights the importance of, if we're going to care for patients, we really had to look through the lens of trauma, and they focus on 4 elements: connecting, focusing on relationship, protecting the patient, and building trust, promoting trust, respecting the choice of the patient, and also redirecting, so encouraging skill building and competence. And so as I read through the literature and read through my students' responses and so on, I took what I know and I put together a similar framework where I added one more to this. I actually combined 2 and I added one more. And this is, and the framework is going to be informing. And what I mean by informing is that it is important to talk to our students about trauma and about the parasympathetic nervous system and how we can activate it. Connecting, I'm going to talk about hospitality, radical hospitality in community. Protecting, how do we protect them from falling into despair? This is where hope is so critical, and so is empathy. And finally, reinforcing what they've learned before and reminding them that we will go back to being on campus, being together. So I'm going to start with informing. And what I mean by informing here is that I tell my students, so I did a similar webinar for my students about trauma-informed learning. And so I began by saying, if you are scared, this is normal. Your fight or flight reaction is working. And the reason I want to say that it is normal, because some of my students, just like I was embarrassed to talk about my anxiety, some of my students are going to be embarrassed, and they are, especially, I have some preliminary data that I collected over the years, especially male students and especially Hispanic male students. They feel that it is not okay to talk about or complain, and they should be strong and so on. And it's important to say that, no, what we're going through is not normal. and experiencing anxiety and fear and depression and all of that is a normal reaction. Now, how can we work through it? So then I also asked them, how can we mitigate, how can we help our sympathetic nervous system response, and how can we go into the parasympathetic? And some of the strategies that I've given them is to talk about what is stress versus immediate threat to life. And so I'm asking my students to keep a journal. Is this a threat to life? Just like I am, just like when I gave you the example of I was at the car shop and I felt like my body was going into, and it was reacting. I had to like close the computer and listen to what was going on and then remind myself that this is not life-threatening. It is on the TV, it is stressful, but it's not life-threatening. Number two, we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system by breathing. It physiologically causes us to slow down. And so I am recommending for my students that they walk, that they laugh, that they engage in some kind of breathing exercise. You don't need to be a meditation girl. You don't need to be certified in this, that, or the other. Breathing is going to be, you can breathe anywhere and slow down your heart rate, slow down your sympathetic nervous system. I'm talking to the students about tapering news consumption and saying, if you watch the news today and if you don't watch it today, is it going to make a difference, right? And I am engaging in the same thing. And I'm also talking to the students about how much they are on the screen and how having too much screen time could cause headache. It could impact our circadian rhythm, especially for staying up at night. And so those are some of the things that I am talking about that, and finally, I am engaging with them when it comes to ambiguity. What are you afraid of? Why are we afraid of the unknown? What's going to happen in the fall, and so on. I think it's really important to engage in that because a lot of times students are afraid of that which is uncertain or ambiguous, and so it's important to work through those issues. The second element is connecting, and this I cannot emphasize how critical it is. And connecting here, I'm going to start by talking about radical hospitality. How can you make your virtual classroom radically hospitable? What I mean by that is be present and communicate often. If you ignore all of your school's emails, but pay attention to your students' email, I can't stress how important it is right now. And so I'm inundated with emails. And what I've been doing is I reply to the students' email right away. And sometimes I say, I got your email. I'm going to reply to you by this time. In addition, show intentionality and transparency. It's important to tell them that I want to be there for you. I miss you. I miss the class. And then remind them that you are there. Remind them how they can reach out to you. So think about what happened. There is like, our reality has been shaken, right? They've been taken out of the classroom, and so how do we create that hospitable community? And it begins with the teacher. In addition to radical hospitality, foster a community that's going to guide us through this. And what I mean by this, create a safe space, build optional discussion to talk about their daily lives, and participate in the discussion. Talk about how you are spending your day and what you are doing, and reveal yourself like my teachers revealed herself. So suggest to the student to check up on each other and facilitate that. What I mean by that, especially for my colleagues who are teaching classes which are 100 students, it's going to be difficult for you to check up on every student. So tell students, talk about the importance of the community, and perhaps assign groups. Actually, I was speaking to my teacher from Senegal, and he said, help the student help each other. And I think it's really critical that we do that right now. And then perhaps they could come back to you and say, I did my assignment. I interviewed the students to see how they are doing, and this is how they are handling it. Perhaps you could write an article together as a class on any topic you decide on, and make that your project for the semester. It could be an article on COVID-19, it could be an article on the economy, it could be an article on The Simpsons. Whatever you decide as a class, then it becomes your own product that you are proud of as a class, and everyone's name is going to be on that paper. Another element when it comes to connection, don't forget about the beauty, and offer them a beauty that is going to help them remain enchanted. And what I mean by that, create an assignment that highlights the beauty within your discipline, or showcase your humor. If you are going to offer synchronous or asynchronous, humor is a form of beauty. And so talk about a joke that you heard or you wrote, or something that made you laugh, like really made you laugh at the bottom from the bottom of your heart. Ask them to share their favorite poem with the class. So the third component is to protect. And what I mean by that, to protect them from the impact of loneliness, the impact of the trauma, from falling into despair. And here I say, offer them reflective hope. What I mean by that is, for example, document your journey of this online transition. And what is it? How is it helping you? What are the challenges? And reflect on this new normal. And the hope you find in that. I would suggest that you create a shared document where everyone can add to it and talk about what they are grateful for today. In addition, when it comes to protect, I suggest that we offer empathy that is grounding. And what I mean by that, on the one hand, I'm going to suggest that we offer structure. So like my students said, please don't change many things. It's really important that we offer them some kind of structure. This is when this is due. This is what you need to do. And at the same time, be flexible with that structure. And third, importantly, give them a choice in that structure. Autonomy is really, really important. So their voice has to be heard. So for example, give them options to document their learning and to come up with alternative assessments, and help them through that. Don't inundate them with many forms of alternative assessment. Give them some options, and then also give them the option to come up with their own alternative assessment. So finally, I want to talk about redirecting. And redirecting here does not mean you inundate them with all the chapters that you were planning to cover, but rather to engage them intellectually. What I mean by that is focus on the materials you've already covered, and remind them by using language like, remember when we studied this, and, or remember when you presented that, and that's really important because it reinforces what they've already learned, and it also allows the gate to open for curiosity for them to learn more. In addition, perhaps you could ask them to come up with topics that you had not intended to cover, but they really want to learn about, and offer them an assignment for them to complete that topic. So for example, I really had not intended to cover SARS in one of my classes, but some of my students want to learn about SARS, and that's perfectly okay. We could come up with an assignment for that. talk about the future, I can't emphasize how important this is to talk about when you come back, when you see your classmates, when you come back to campus. It will give the students an opportunity to look forward to something that is in the future. And again, excuse me, I can't emphasize how important it is to keep them engaged. So the power of personal connection is, I cannot emphasize how critical it is to employ that right now. And so I want to share with you that in 2014, there is a Gallup index. It found that having a personal relationship with a faculty member, it really predicted how well a person is going to be in their life, the well-being of that person. And I want to share with you some of the quotes that came out of that report, where students said, what really matters is they had a mentor who encouraged my hopes and dreams, a professor who cared about me, or at least one professor who made me excited about learning. And so don't hold back, show them you care. I am heartened that you are here, and you are here because you care. Because like Kevin Gannon says, we teach because we believe it matters. And so don't hold back, show them, get them excited about learning, help them become hopeful about the future. In the same study that I shared with you earlier from Pima Community College, one of the students wrote, when I asked them to describe an optimal learning environment, and it really didn't matter whether they were online students or face-to-face students, they talked about relationships, relationships. I would like to know more people I can relate to in the class. If the professor helped facilitate that, it would help me. I can join study groups then. And another student says, professors can create an optimal learning environment by building relationships with students and making themselves available to those who need help. It is really heartwarming for me when I asked my students just last week, how can I help you? How many of them came back and said, help my classmate, I don't need help right now. And there's already a sense of camaraderie and sense of community. And what we need to do is foster it, encourage it, nourish it. So I'm going to, we're towards the end right now. I want to share a few things with you. What inspires me is a poem by Rumi, the Persian poet Rumi. He wrote it to a student talking about don't give up. And in that poem says, come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of fleeting, it does not matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. And when I shared this poem with my students a few years ago, one of them, inspired by this poem, came up with this beautiful depiction of this caravan, that we are on a caravan of hope. And what I want to say is that our caravan is cloaked with radical hospitality. We journey on the hope-paved road to heal, and we sing to the tune of humanity's heart. There is another poem that inspires me by Rumi, where he says that out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, I will meet you there. Let's meet our students in that field where we make it a learning sanctuary. I want to end with perhaps the most important advice that someone gave me, and I want to share with you, is students' voice. And my teacher, Dr. Eric Bedoso, who works with healers, he's a medical doctor and also a traditional healer from Senegal. And he works with healers, and he tells healers that if you really want to heal, if you want to work with a person who's broken, who has anxiety, you must begin when you want to become a healer, you must begin by forgetting about yourself. And forgetting about ourselves in this moment means that we let go of the rigor and perhaps the grade. So, and really to really listen to our students and tune into what they are needing right now. And so with that, I am going to end, and I'm going to look at a few questions. This is my email. This is my Twitter. I wrote a short article entitled Hope Matters that's inside Higher Ed, where I share some of the strategies that I shared with you today. I am going to offer a session that will be free for all, that is how to help your student navigate through trauma. And so it's the session that I gave to my students, Trauma-Informed Learning, and I'm going to offer that to all educators. So with that, I am so grateful that you joined us today. And so let's see. We have 5 minutes, so I could take some questions to answer them. Thank you. So we have a question: to what extent does being present and communicating often presume that faculty or instructors are not themselves negotiating radically transformed teaching environments at home? It made that assumption, and I apologize for that. What I mean by being present is and communicating. You can try to find 5 minutes a day, just 5 minutes a day, where you check in with the students. I recognize that our lives have been transformed. Some of us are all of a sudden, perhaps our single mom negotiating things at home. Steal 5 minutes from your home to communicate with the students. I would argue that it will make you feel better. What ways are people incorporating learners' voice? I think I understand the question. If I don't, I apologize. I am doing a lot of, I ask my students for their phone numbers, and I ask them if it's okay to call them, and I am calling them and checking up on them. I have 25 students per class. If you have 200 students in the class, it is not going to be possible. And so perhaps having SurveyMonkey forms or Google Forms is a way to help with incorporating the learner's voice. How can we help seniors who are struggling with this unexpected ending to their education career? This is a great question. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review about the grief we are facing, and it's grieving the loss of normalcy. I think talking about it is important. When I reached out to my students and I found out how many of them lost their jobs, I can't give them their jobs back. There's nothing I can do, but I can listen and I can tell them that I've been there and it sucks, but it's not life-threatening, and we will get through it together. It's important to respect the trauma and that they are going through, and not to undermine it, and at the same time to remind them that we will get through it together. And perhaps, yeah, that's. There's another question here. Yes, can you offer a student presentation on trauma? I will definitely offer that. I offered it to my students, and I offered it to my students, and I asked them for feedback, and what was overwhelming is the sigh of relief, like, this is normal what I'm experiencing. Or one student said, I wish I knew, because they were feeling really guilty that, you know, I am not sick, I'm not in the hospital, why am I feeling like I can't do my homework, and so on. So the answer is yes, I will offer it, I will share it. You could share it with your students, with your colleagues. Let's see. There are no more questions. So actually there are, let's see here. So there is a question here about, are there noticeable distinctions between millennials and Generation Z that are important for educators to consider? I'm not sure distinction with respect to the data that I showed. There was a distinction between the millennials and other generation when it comes to loneliness, and as well as Generation Z. So another question is that students are afraid that they might die for good reasons, that they or some of their family members might die. How can we make changes to what you suggested about stress versus possibly dying? I think a lot of us are struggling with that. It's waking me up in the middle of the night. And what I am doing is I am trying to, perhaps you suggest to them that focus on being here right now, that right now I am alive and I am not dying. This is really difficult. I am not a psychologist, and all I'm doing is I'm trying to, you have to be really in tune with the student to as much as possible, and see what works for them. And perhaps saying, I know you're scared and so am I. Sometimes that's all we could do. I will offer the student presentation on trauma. Yes, so there is one more, let's see here actually. So I am going to stop right now. I have another presentation to give. I want to thank you for being with us, and I want to thank my housemate for looking through the questions, and I will share the materials with you. If you have any questions, let me know, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.